Are we working? Hey, Redemption Church, Pastor Vince here, and welcome to Thursday's Vinny G Live. I am Vince Garvey, hence the Vinny.
I'm Anthony G, hence the G.
And that's why you get Vinny G Live. We talked to you guys on Tuesday about this kind of new format that we were going to be doing with y'all. We're on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We're just going to have an opportunity to be with you guys, kind of streaming and trying to be really intentional with trying to get content out to you that we think is important for us to know during this crazy Corona season. So Tuesdays are going to have kind of a greater emphasis on, what are updates happening at the church, what are things we think you guys need to know, along with some fun segments to just have fun with each other and encourage us kind of in this crazy season that is life right now. But Thursdays, we said, we're going to be a little bit different, and then we're going to be kind of a focus on what we're going to call Theology and Culture Thursdays, where we'll take something happening in our world, society, and culture, and say, what is the Bible, what is the gospel, what do they have to say about those kind of things. So we loved on Tuesday, which was one of the best parts of this whole thing, was having the interaction with so many of you that were commenting and speaking, and so we just love that aspect and kind of the season where we have to be a part that we can join in together. And so if you feel like it, comment, ask questions as we go. We might be able to address them throughout the time together. So today will be a little bit longer than Tuesday. We're going to delve into, like I said, different issues. And so today's emphasis for Theology and Culture Thursdays is going to be on the idea of deconstruction. Some of you are going to know what that is. Many of you probably do not. And so our plan today is to introduce the idea to you. And then talk about why we think it's happening in and amongst the church and within our culture today, and then what is the way forward, if you will, for the church and for us trying to be faithful Christians. So let me give you start off with just the textbook definition for deconstruction, and we'll start there and then work our way through. So deconstruction is a method of critical analysis of philosophical and literary language, with emphasis on the internal workings of language and the conceptual systems that are part of it, right? The relational quality of meaning and the assumptions implicit in forms of expression. So really like what you believe, why you believe it, why you say the things you say, do the things you do, to be critical about those things with a hope of something better coming out on the other end, I think is the idea. But that's a confusing definition. Ant and I have been talking about this for a while. When you think deconstruction, what's popping in your head?
Yeah, it's kind of being used in the church world or those that have left the church world to kind of describe the process they went through in regards to when they began to analyze and examine their Christian faith. So a lot of people that grew up in the church or were in the church for a long time, all of a sudden they'll say they've gone through this deconstruction process where they kind of critically analyze parts of the faith, ideas of the faith, bring in other ideas and worldviews into it, and they, in a sense, their faith gets deconstructed. Like they deconstruct what they once believed or what they thought, and so that's kind of the layman's terms. It's kind of this term being used to just describe people's journey deconstructing their faith.
Right. Yeah. So there's an imagery to it, I think. Right. That's like you build a house and then you're like taking it apart because you think that if you can get back down maybe to some of the foundational pieces, you'll be able to build something up that's better than what was there before. And so one of the things we wanted to make clear, and we talked about this a lot yesterday, was that deconstruction, right, in and of itself, it's not a bad thing, right? Like there's good things that are to be potentially experienced in the midst of it. Being critical about what we believe and why we believe it, why we do the things we do, like that's just almost always a good thing. The Bible calls us, right, to triage our lives and like really confront what we believe, with a hope that like the answer would move us, I think, in dependency towards Jesus. So there's all of those aspects that kind of inform this, but I think at the base level, the reason why this was like, hey, the first Theology and Culture Thursdays is because it's become really personal for us, right? Yeah. Like there's stories that we have. Yeah. And so why is this so important, I think, for both of us, but I mean specifically for you, what's popping up?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys probably could relate if you've been in the church for any extended period of time or part of the church for a part of time, you begin to see people who begin to do this. Something comes up and they walk out on their faith, or they leave the church for this reason or that reason. And so yeah, I grew up in the church, as a lot of you guys know, and so I feel like I've seen this kind of process happen a bunch of times in a lot of different ways, and even just talking to you, I know that you've seen, you didn't grow up in the church, but you've still seen it being in the church for a while. And so recently, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Rhett and Link. They're on YouTube. They have a podcast called Ear Biscuits, which that's a pretty good name for a podcast. They have a YouTube channel called Good Mythical Morning. They do a bunch of other stuff on YouTube too. But what they did recently on their podcast is they gave their deconstruction story. Right. They began to share, almost it sounded like a testimony, but it was a testimony going the other direction of like how they lost their faith.
It's like a conversion story.
Yeah.
Like it's like,
absolutely. It even sounds like a conversion story. Sounds like a lot of times, and so, but just going the other way, so it's more like a deconversion story. They grew up in the church. They were really involved in the church. They were even missionaries for a while. All
with Crew.
With Campus Crusade, Crew now, and so yeah. So I think that brought it to the forefront recently to me, and just even my own heart's wrestle of like, well, oh man, they were with us. They were like in health, and they even admit we were in mostly healthy situations. Like we didn't have anything bad happening to us, and so. There's that aspect, and then just even the personal aspect of like just close friends of mine who I love deeply, who've stepped away from the faith for what they feel like are good reasons, and just my heart's wrestle in the midst of that. And so that's why I think it's a good thing for us to talk about. I mean, what's some of your kind of heart?
Yeah, like you said, so like, not growing up in the church, becoming a Christian, starting to follow Jesus in college. There was like a slew of us. There might even be some friends that might pop on and watch this at some point that are friends that are kind of part of this like crazy random movement of like all these non-Christian friends of ours that were all like, hey, I think this is real, and it just, for some of us it like codified and was like, this is it, and then over time some of it just seemed to kind of melt away, and I think the piece that really drove us yesterday was, like in tears, like we think through these things, you know what I mean? So it's at really deep levels, I think it's like it's a lament piece at a certain level, and I don't mean to like blow it up beyond it is, but it's just like, hey, if what we believe is that this is like the true story of the world, and now close friends that we have like just think that's crazy, or and maybe even at times like abusive, and so like so I think the hope then for the rest of our time here is to talk about, well, then what are some of the things that are shaping this, right? Like why are we seeing this happen? Why do we think it's happening? And then really again, what is the way forward? So we've got 3 buckets we want to talk about today, that we 3 kind of major reasons, and I'm sure there's more. These are really for us some of the ones that I think floated to the top as we were kind of navigating this. And so the first one is this idea of competing worldviews, which I think that gets tossed around a lot. Like we sort of hear, oh, that's my world, but what the heck do we mean? Like, what is that all? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So like, I mean, if you weren't homeschooled, you're like, what's a worldview? Because it's a big part of homeschool curriculum usually.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it is. So, anyways, a worldview is just the way you view the world, the way you view everything. So it's kind of like what kind of bucket do you sit in to make sense of evil? What kind of bucket do you sit in to make sense of spirituality, science, all these different kinds of things? Like, how do you view the world, and where is the almost like the glasses you put on to view the world? And
that's a good way.
And I think when you go to different cultures or just even meet different people in our own cities, you're going to see people there because of how they grew up or because of the situations they're in. They kind of have this sort of a worldview, whatever it might be. They think the world is this way because of these things, and so that's what I would say a worldview is. And especially in our country, there's lots of competing worldviews. So that's why we kind of say competing worldviews. I mean, even just this is us spouting our worldviews. There's just so many platforms and ways for people to like just say what they think and think.
Probably now more than ever. Right?
Yeah, I would say
technology has made it so then like you everyone has the opportunity to like craft a new lens that then you want to share, like, hey, no, you should view the world this way because I've borrowed from these like 7 different things, right? Like, and so people are constantly, I think, kind of reformatting new ideas of the way like you're supposed to view the world, and in that, like, it just becomes like kind of crazy of like, well, which way is up? I think at the end of the day, I think there's the reality of when you look at how we got here, right? Like, I think when you think through how did kind of Western society specifically, how did the United States of America really end up here, you have to go back and look at the Enlightenment. If maybe you didn't take medieval heritage, or you didn't take kind of probably European history classes, maybe you've heard that term, you should have, otherwise the school system has let you down. The Enlightenment was this kind of great movement amongst kind of the European nations, where there is age of discovery, the scientific method starts coming out of that, right? Like it's all of this idea of let us push away the sacred and really the godly, right? The religious, and say like, no, we're going to really deal with what is tangible, what is present, what is here,
what can be measured.
Right, what can be reasoned with, right? And so in the midst of that, then it was like, well, we don't need anything else. And so for years you had Greek philosophical thought, right, that was driving, hey, there was always this dualistic system that was kind of heaven and the spiritual things, and then there was kind of the tangible, practical. The movement of the Enlightenment was like, no, forget even the other half. Like, we don't even need to divide this anymore. It's just what we have here. You get humanism that kind of flows out of that, this belief that like, we're going to figure this thing out. We don't need God, and so on and so forth. So that, I feel like at the heart of it, that has overwhelmed Western society.
Almost like that's almost like the worldview of the West. Like, that's the one we're. I want to say, how real is this? How is this possible? And so the scientific method becomes this big way that we all kind of try to view reality, right?
Yes. Yeah. Reality defined by cultural values, cultural views that I think try and present themselves as neutral, but are not. Right? And so I think like oftentimes when you get into this conversation around deconstruction, Christians are trying to push their stuff, right? Like, we're out here peddling stuff, which we are. Like, just like full disclosure, we absolutely are. And if you're a Christian, like, that's okay. Like, you know what I mean? Like, Jesus was like, no, go tell people about this stuff, Totally. And so, but I think the lie is that we're the only ones doing it.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Like,
totally. That
the world is just this neutral, unbiased. They're not trying to shape or form you, which is just foolish.
Like, as if the scientific method itself is neutral. So you're basically saying, hey, I would even go so far as to say the scientific method, I don't think that's a neutral way in which to view the world. Would you say that?
Well, I would say, no, because I mean, there's just very practically, there's just the stuff that it doesn't apply to that it cannot speak an answer to. Right? It just, totally. And that's not just the pastors saying that. I mean, that's like just critical science theory is going to be like, no, like, it can't answer everything. Right? Like, how do you judge love? You know what I mean? Like, there's this great, it's this great story. It's this gal, and she was a devout scientist, atheist, and kind of wrote this line of just like, hey, like, when I had a kid, like, she talks about after having her first child, was I loved that child more than evolution could explain, right? Like, it didn't make, like, it just, evolution in the science, it just didn't add up to like the amount of love she had for a kid, which I think you and I could both understand, right? Like, it just, why would I love this thing that makes my life more difficult and awful?
No, totally. It doesn't. It's completely counterintuitive.
Especially my kids.
Even in our comments right now, we're seeing what's someone that doesn't have a neutral worldview about our hair right now. And so, if we were in a different time and place, so Andy Zyman is just saying both of your hair right now, and that's fair. But if you had a different worldview, you would see us as beautiful image bearers of God. But Andy has her struggles. And so,
Andy had the best. She did have the best. I think she probably thought of it as a criticism. We thought of it as an encouragement. After Tuesday's live stream, she said that it was a mix between a talk show and I think like a high school like
announcements.
Announcement
like the
show,
morning
right?
news
Yeah, the morning
announcements,
show at like a high school.
It's
which-
probably closer to that.
Production quality, even
Yeah.
as we look at it on the screen, we know is low,
Yeah.
and that's something we are trying to fix in the next upcoming weeks. But honestly, at real hard level, like kind of what we're going for.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, he's gonna, you're gonna look kind of, someone said Einstein-ish over these next few months. I'm gonna look like year one of the Beatles-ish over these next coming months. So,
dude, that's
we
a
know.
sport.
That's, I don't know.
Yeah, come on.
But anyways, well, thinking about this idea of worldviews being neutral and just kind of coming back around, I think there's like a couple ways like that we can see in our society right now that shows our worldview, the scientific method, if that's like kind of the lens that we use to construct things, or even like maybe you're listening, you're like, I don't use the scientific method, but I just want to come at things from an unbiased place. Like, I just think that's kind of impossible.
Yes.
Here's an example of something I think a lot of people in our society think about, and it's this idea of chronological snobbery. I don't know if you guys have heard this before. I think C.S. Lewis might have coined this term.
I would say you probably don't think of it in those terms.
Yeah.
No, when I'm like, I'm really delving into chronological
Yeah.
snobbery.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know who exactly came up with the term, but the idea is this: is I think most people today think, man, we are a lot smarter than
Right.
previous civilizations. We we know how to do things. We know the Earth isn't flat. We know all these things that previous societies, they were so dumb because they thought these things. And I think some of that is chronological snobbery because, one, I think if the internet went out tomorrow, we'd have like a Walking Dead situation going on right
It's
now.
kind of happening in our
Yeah,
office.
it's almost like the toilet paper situation out there is already Walking Dead level. But anyways, that being said, like for us to think that we are smarter and we know more about the world and know more about spirituality and know more about reality than like take the ancient Egyptians, for instance, who did all these feats of technology. And the more you study the ancient Egyptians, you just see they did these great things that even today we can't explain some of the things they did and how they did them. Or if you look at ancient Chinese culture and some of the things they did and how they did them, we just don't know. Yeah, there's just all kinds of things. And so I think part of having this Western worldview, we get this chronological snobbery sometimes where we go, no, I'm unbiased, I know a lot, I'm on the, we don't even think of it as standing on the shoulders of those before us. But even worse, we don't think, man, people of other times and cultures are smarter than me. Like that's I think that's just fundamentally true. And maybe even know more than me.
Yeah,
Like-
yeah. No, and so that's the thing is, right, there's no doubt that obviously in like the world today, we know more on the whole than they used to know, right? Like there's just reality. The science has allowed us to know things that like, you know what I mean? And even just access to that, right? Because of the internet, you and I know stuff that like, you know what I mean? 50 years ago, right? I mean, like my pop like doesn't know a lot of those things just because he doesn't get to scroll all the content that I get to consume every day. But I think especially pressing into like intelligence, and how one can process kind of the bigger questions of life, like the ignorance and then I think rather the arrogance, I think, of that statement of like, we're so much more enlightened, right?
Yeah, totally.
But I think when we realize like that's because of the Enlightenment.
Even calling that section of history the Enlightenment
Right,
itself
right,
is
right.
biased, right? Like, look, this is when we figured it out. This is when the light came into the world for us, right?
Right.
Like that's biased language.
Yeah, and I don't think too many of us would like, if we could live for 300 more years, would look back at the aughts and you know what I mean, the way stuff's going right now, and be like, well, that's when we were crushing it. Do you know what I mean? Like the Dark Ages, those were bad, but right now, man, like they really figured it out. The world is such a great place, So there's holes in the midst of that, and it makes me think of there's not just like a chronological piece to it, but there's like a cultural snobbery that comes along with it as well.
Yeah.
In other words, there's certain things, right, that I think we've adopted as like, this is gospel. Or, so in secular language, like this is just truth, right? This is what's absolutely true. That the rest of the world's like, no, we don't think that. You know what I mean?
No.
Like Africa, Asia, they're like, no, we actually don't buy into that aspect of what you believe to be true,
Yeah.
but morally and spiritually and on down the line. And so I think like there's this reality to it of like, there's not just, hey, we're farther along because we live now, but I think there's this, we're farther along because we live here.
Yeah, totally.
And that's another piece of just like real arrogant thought. It's like, hey, like, because I'm an American, because I'm in the West, my stuff is right, and the people that live over there, right, they're wrong.
Totally.
Now, no one would ever say that, right? Because we live we're trying to all be woke culture, so it's, well, we're everyone's great, but it's like, no, you literally will attack people that believe the same things as some of our Eastern friends here and now, but still say that they're fine and we're wrong, right? So there's just a level of us needing to acknowledge the biases that we all approach with, which again, as a Christian, I'm telling you I'm biased, right? Like, I believe that Jesus Christ is the risen Savior, King of the world that reigns on the throne today, right? I mean, like, that's going to have massive implications on what I believe and what I tell you. And I think other people need to realize, no, you've been shaped by that.
Yeah.
The air you've breathed, the water you've drank, is filled with just as much bias as mine.
All right, I have two questions for you then, and kind of in this conversation. The first question kind of relates to earlier what we're talking about with the scientific method. So, is science bad then? Like, there's even part of me right now that's like, some of the things we're saying, but science does help us see some things, even flat Earth versus not flat Earth or whatever. And I know that's controversial, unfortunately, these days. Is science bad for a Christian? Is it bad? Like, how would you answer that?
A big giant no.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I mean, there's pitfalls to it, right? It's just, I think science becomes bad when it becomes an idol, just like anything else, right? Like it becomes bad when it is the thing our hope is in, not God who invented everything, right? I mean, like, thought of everything, and science works at his bidding, and that type of idea. But I mean, it reminds me of the story. I mean, there was a moment. I think I've shared this on Sundays with y'all at some point, but there was a moment I was doing some work in West Africa in Guinea-Conakry, and I was working with the Yalunka people in Yatia, and they're just amazing people, just more loving and communal and generous and amazing than a lot of us. But I remember there was a video that we showed them, and the video zooms in from outer space and then zooms in on Earth, which was a ball, right? I mean, Earth is a ball. That's what most of us, right, believe. And so they see this thing, and all of a sudden in the room is this ton of commotion around, like, what is that? And I asked all these questions. I'm like, hey, what are they talking about there? And our translator said, oh, well, they don't believe that that's Earth. And we said, well, why not? They said, because Earth is flat. Right? And so this was 10 years ago, right? And so in the midst of that, like, we start trying to tell them, like, actually it's not. Like, it's round, and they weren't buying it. They're like, there's no way that's true or whatever. So in the midst of that, like, we have now discovered, right, that the Earth is indeed round, and that means some things for a ton of things, right? For the implications of, like, how we travel, like how we understand, like, gravity, how we understand the tilt of the Earth, how we understand then all the cultural climate impacts of this type of stuff, right? All these things now, because we know it's not just some board we're operating. It changes a ton of stuff, and so science is an absolute gift. The Enlightenment, in many ways, was an absolute gift to the world. It's just when it all of a sudden has found its place of ultimate authority to jettison Jesus, right, and to jettison God, that's when it just becomes super unhelpful.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
Yeah,
that's good. I actually remember when I was a kid and learning that the Earth wasn't flat. It was like a whoa day for me. Like, that day, I was like, no, I'm pretty sure.
Dude, that was like Kyrie Irving,
flat.
like 6 months ago.
So anyways,
sorry, Kyrie, if you're probably watching this.
He's a follower.
Yeah.
We love you, Kyrie. Here's my second question. So so that's kind of good. Science isn't all bad, but we just have to know that if maybe there's aspects of reality that science just can't show us or teach us or let us know about. I think that's probably a good heart to have about well,
Yeah.
here. What about this? So I think a lot of people might see us talking about worldviews and just go, well, okay, here your worldview is just then. It's just based on where you grew up or where you were born, like what part of the world you were in, and so it's not really truth. Like truth is really hard to find. And some cultures have some of it, and other cultures have some of it. And how would you speak to that? Like, are we just products of where we were born? And if that's the case, then are we just Christians because of where we were born?
Right. I mean, honestly, there's a few things, and I'll try and speak less. I know I'm talking probably too much, but I mean, the first most obvious one is that it's like, no, I grew up in Louisiana, and literally everyone was a Christian.
Yeah.
And then I left still not a Christian, right? Like, I everything that surrounded me was Christian, and everyone did the Christian thing, and we never bought into it, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's just so, even just from a experiential standpoint, I think another experiential reality, and it's not just, I guess it's empirical as well, is look, like the global church is just exploding right now, right? Like as numbers do drop in the West, right? Specifically in the United States, Canada, Western Europe, like gosh man, they're like blowing up everywhere else. Like the church in Africa, the church in Asia, the church in like the former Soviet bloc, like Eastern Europe, like that, like South Asia. It's like it's just going bonkers, you know. So like at that level, and it's certainly like at the heart of those cultures is still very much like not Jesus, right? Totally. So it's not like, well, they became Christian now, and so it's like no, that's not happening. But the conversion rates are just astounding. And the last thing I'd say to it is this argument, and this is not, I'm truly not meant to be like a, hey, just believe what I say here, but please, like, you know, like if you're watching, like just go and watch some of the more renowned atheists that are not kind of in that neo-atheist camp, like so the Dawkins and the Harrises and stuff like that.
These are the popular atheists.
The popular atheists, right? That kind of toss out this. It really, at the end of the day, right? It's a fallacy. This idea that, hey, if you're born here, that means you'll do this and that means you'll do that. It sounds right. Like it sounds like, oh, that just sounds so good. I got him. And listen, like the more like world-renowned, like you guys actually know what you're talking about. When you get into a debate, like it's serious. They're like, dude, stop saying that. Like that doesn't. It's not philosophically accurate. It is a philosophical fallacy. It doesn't determine what's true or not. Like it's just something that sounds good. So anyway,
that's good. Well, how else does what else does then Western society? What does it breed then? What's like something else that it kind of leads to and breeds in a way that shapes our worldview and shapes how we think through things and shapes this deconstruction story? Like how so all that makes sense. Why, if all those Enlightenment things are happening, it makes sense that there would be this deconstruction moment for Christians, because the Christian worldview is very different than the Enlightenment worldview. It's just bound to happen. It seems like. So what are some other things kind of this Western Enlightenment worldview does that causes someone to maybe, begin to deconstruct their faith a bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I might just even kick it back to you. In regard, because when you start kind of navigating some of this stuff, I feel it's conversations you and I had a ton. That I feel like you just have a ton of insight on. I'm just like culture, like the Western worldview, Enlightenment has created this ever-shifting landscape of what is true, and we've talked about this before, that for a long time, like post-Enlightenment, like what was true was what could be proven by scientific method and reason, right? So you're like, okay, well, we're gonna put our stamp on that. But gosh, man, that's not what even now people are like, maybe 30% of the population is starting to say, no, it's really just what I want it to be, right? Like it's kind of personal expression, personal desire, it's personal rhetoric, who can yell the loudest, that kind of stuff. So I think the ever-shifting landscape is really difficult for us as Christians to navigate, because we tend to be too reactive and not proactive. But will you talk about some of those where you've seen like shifting like definitions of like just these big ideas that have now like moved us in weird ways?
That's good. I think even just before I go there, just kind of this ever-shifting idea, it probably, how you can connect it to the Enlightenment is the Enlightenment, if they give you this tool of like the scientific method, and they're saying this is how you can determine reality, this is how you can determine what's real, then everybody has this tool, and everybody becomes individuals using this tool, which I think leads to this like rampant individualism.
Yes.
I don't think that's the only thing
Yes.
in the Enlightenment that led to individualism, but I think that's one thing. So now everybody becomes like, if you're following through on the scientific method as accurately as possible, you have more truth than the person next to you. And so
Yeah.
when individualism happens, then there's this ever-shifting reality, because you'll say something, you say, no, I figured this out because of these observations and these things, so this has to be true.
Right.
Then I'll go, but because of my observations and these things that I've followed the same method, the same ways of looking through things, I've landed here. And so what we've seen with science too, science just changes over the centuries. Like people just over time discover new things, differently.
Right, what is true
Yeah.
changes over time, right? Yeah.
And there's almost like a goodness, in that. Like I think God has put in us this heart to discover the world and look at the world and see what the world's like. Like that, there's like a goodness in there. So I want us to be careful not to just throw everything the Enlightenment did like as it's bad. Like there's like a lot of good things that tap into I think even like the image of God in us. And so I think this ever-shifting stuff just happens. Like people, when you're an individual and you're the one defining what's true and what's real and what's right, definitions change, things change over time. So like even just values of cultures change, right? Even that value, how it's defined changes. You know, like at the beginning of American history, freedom was defined one way, and mostly for guys that looked like me that also owned land, which I do not, so I would have been in trouble. And so, and then that shifted over time as to what is a person, and even now today, there's debates about what that is in different ways. And so, I think that's kind of how the ever-shifting in individualism, it takes things. It takes things like love, like 400 years ago, we would define love in this one way as a society, and now I feel like in our society today, love is mostly just affection and kindness, and that's like the only way that we define love. It's nothing except for affection and kindness, and I mean, maybe it's more than that for some people, but it feels like that's kind of how it's defined. And so even tolerance looks different throughout time, and even all these different things.
Well, it's that idea, right? Like tolerance was like the church's deal. You know what I mean? Like, and that's what's so like.
I actually read something recently where the author was making a claim: tolerance exists in the world today because Christians were tolerant in the first century. You know?
I know, and that's what's so crazy. And so, like, the Christians brought in this tolerance movement, right? Like 2,000 years ago, living kind of the life of Jesus. But because the definition has changed, right? And we're going to talk about this in a moment. The church has dropped the ball in some ways as well. But the definition has shifted. So now people would say, well, maybe that's where it started, but you're not living that way now. And it's like, no, we're just living based on a definition that initially came in, not like kind of this new definition of what tolerance is, right? And so at that level, I think it just gets confusing. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know there's kind of this other facet that you've been talking about a lot lately too, is just how much like community and the influencers around us also change to this, like almost cause us to be shifting in our worldview. So that almost pushes away. It's almost the opposite of individualism. But how does the people around you kind of cause deconstruction to happen? What do you think's going on there?
I think the Bible was pretty clear when it was saying we were going to be like created in God's image. Like there was a communal nature to that, right? So even when our culture would be like, "Hey, we're rampant individualists, and I make decisions for myself," which hopefully even in what we said today, but if I could be as explicit about it as possible, it's just not true. We all make decisions that are like. Right, like influenced by all sorts of factors, and we take it all, and then we make a decision or whatever. So I think in us is this like communal piece, and I think it's supposed to be there. And the deal is that when we're the ever shifting stuff, the landscape that's always changing, who you listen to, right? Like who do you allow to have say and influence in your life, right? Like. Who gets to be that person for you, or persons, Some of it is as explicit as that, right? It's, I'm going to choose to listen to these people. They are going to shape me, okay? But then there's also just like the slow drip reality of us being communal people, being around people will shape you. Like, this is the great idea, right? Like, things are more caught than taught, right? So if you hang out with a certain people for so long, like, you're just gonna slowly become like them. Like what you shared with me years ago, right? Like, it's the 5 closest people to you or something like that when you're growing up, right? Are gonna be
I mean, so they say for a lot of people when they grow up in the faith, what keeps them in the faith is 5 relationships with 5 Christians that are not your family members.
Right.
So that makes sense.
Yeah, so I mean, like, you're just naturally like, who are those 5 people that are gonna be in your life?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's like T-Mobile's like friends that, I don't know what that was called, but like who are the people that are gonna
Faith 5.
Yeah, Faith 5 or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like, that you're like, this is the people that are gonna be a phone.
Yeah.
Those 5 people, you're gonna be like a composite of those 5 people. You know.
Yeah.
And not necessarily, not completely, but that's just a reality of the world we live in. So part of this deconstruction piece, we need to ask ourselves, like, well, who am I choosing to listen to?
Yeah.
Who are the people I'm surrounding myself by?
Yeah.
And knowing they are not neutral, right, either. And so I think there's the appearance of, especially as a Christian, right, like, it can come across like, okay, I'm going to say, hey, I want to love Jesus more, so I'm going to try and surround myself with some other Christians that I respect in the faith, that can mentor me, and that I want to, like, just glean wisdom and life from, right? Like, now, that can sound, like, exclusive and can sound like I don't want to be around non-Christians. It's just, I believe this is the true story of the world. Yeah. And I also believe that the competing stories are very winsome. Yeah. Right? But I think they're false. Yeah. And so in the midst of that, it's like, okay, then I have to then say, no, if this is true, I'm going to intentionally place myself in places that are going to spur on the truth, right? And do it that way. Otherwise, it's just like, gosh, that's not, I'm just going to lose sight of what's going on, you know? And I think that's why Jesus, you know what I mean? Like, he got the 12 together, and then he had the 3. Like, he was constantly trying to build strong community that would learn from each other and move forward. So I just know so many of the stories of my friends that I have, right, that have, like, departed from the faith. The community that they're in, like, shaped a ton of that, right? And it's a problem because I still believe this is the true story of the world, right? I still believe Jesus rose from the dead, and so that's why it's grievous, you know, and that's why it's like, if we as Christians want to be faithful for the rest of our lives, right? Like, work out our salvation with fear and trembling till the day He returns. Then in the midst of it, it's like, all right, well then I'm going to intentionally place myself on a consistent basis with those that will edify that story in me.
Yeah, that's good. No, that's really good. I think we should all be aware about how people around us are shaping us.
I do, like, before we became friends. I never watched the NBA. Right? Like, the NBA was like a slow drip of you always talking about the NBA. And I was like, I guess I should follow this, because that's just what, like, I like, and now I love it. Right? Now I'm looking up stats and all that kind of stuff, which my wife loves. And so Polar Pops, like, I didn't used to do Polar Pops, which, if you don't know what a Polar Pop is, just don't go. I mean, it's a Circle K drink, but I mean, like, so I mean, like, just the slow drip of community.
All right, I have 2 wrestling pushbacks. I know there's other topics we want to get to. But 2 wrestling pushbacks with this idea. Okay, the first pushback is this: how is Christianity just not, like, brainwashing? Like, it sounds a little bit like, totally. Make sure you're with the people that they know, like, what's true, and be a good boy. How is this not just brainwashing? Like, or maybe it is. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
It is.
Yeah. Okay.
It's just like, I think, brainwashing. Look, it has all these connotations to what that means. As if, like, there's this, like, mischievous. You know what I mean? Like, it's like Pinky in the Brain, like, kind of like plotting. How are we going to deceive you? Literally, like, kind of the idea of brainwashing is like, we're literally trying to wash your brain, like, flood your brain with truth. And the realization that like, yeah, churches do that, Christians do that, Muslims and like every other religion does that.
Yeah.
Atheists do that, agnostics do that. Like everyone is trying to peddle their worldview in a way that they think, no, if you live this way, it'd be better for you and for me. So at a certain level, gosh, like, no, that's exactly what we're doing.
Totally.
Because we think the story's true. You know what I mean? Like, it's that, I can't remember his first name, but the guy, the Penn and Teller guy.
Penn Jillette.
Yeah, Penn Jillette, right? So he comes out and says, talking about how he's an atheist, but how he fully expects Christians to like preach and evangelize to him.
Yeah.
And because if they didn't, he literally says like, if a Christian isn't willing to like share the gospel with me and try and save me, how much must that Christian hate me?
Yeah.
Because they believe I'm going to hell, right?
Totally.
Like, and so I think there's a reality that I think some of us as Christians can almost feel like intimidated by that reality of like, oh, I don't want to come across as this. It's like, no, but that's what it is. Like, you know what I mean? But so is everyone else. Like the playing field is level.
Yeah.
When it comes out.
So I mean, if I'm hearing you correctly, basically you're saying like Christianity, it's not brainwashing in the sense of like there are been devious peoples throughout time that have tried to manipulate people into believing wrong things or believing things so they do certain things. But Christianity,
well, there have been.
Yeah, there have been.
But that's not Jesus.
Even within Christianity.
Within Christianity,
yes.
absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
Those things have existed. We'll talk about some of that in just a moment.
Yeah.
But that's not Jesus.
Yeah.
Right? That's not the scriptures. And I think that's where it gets lost in the midst of it. It's like, it's just, it's not what's going on.
All right.
You know?
No, that makes sense. And so Christianity more, it in a sense like it's unabashedly going like, yeah, we do have a bias, like, and we are trying not to brainwash you, but we are trying to heavily influence you and wash the cultural idols away from you and the cultural proclivities away from you to be part of Christ's culture that He has for us. That would be kind of so. I think that's fair. I think it's almost like there is an aspect of this. It's not brainwashing in the devious sense, but it probably is on some kind of technical level, but not.
I mean, it goes the same way the other direction, right? So if you are of kind of a lot of the neo-atheist crowd that would say, hey, like we think religion isn't just wrong, that it's harmful, right? They'll cite things that I think are easily inaccurate, right? Like, all wars have been caused by Christians, which just fundamentally isn't true. But if that is your worldview and that is your belief, right, that religion as a whole, Christianity in particular, is a dangerous thing for society, no, I fully expect you to get out there and like try and shut me down, right? Yeah. Because if not, you're not a good person. Yeah. Like if you think I am doing harm to people, it makes absolute sense that you would try and say, no, like he's wrong, here's why you should believe that. Yeah. And I respect that, right? Yeah. Out of dear friends, and so I think there is some of that reality in the midst of it. But some of this I think then circles back to you get this reality of then people, Christians, they're living and swimming in all these waters and trying to navigate all this. They're maybe with people that are constantly calling into question things that they've always believed, right? Yeah. Which again, that's part of deconstruction that is helpful, which we talked about in the beginning. Like deconstruction can be good, critical analysis can be good, but it does begin to raise like doubts, right? Like doubts sneak in, and then a lot of times I think what happens is the doubts are there, and instead of like going to the church or like going to those who have labored and studied and have legitimate answers, right, to this. Instead, the doubts become kind of these privatized things I need to keep to myself, and then they don't go and explore that. That, I think, is a pitfall, right? Yeah. And so when you talk about, and maybe even if you want to circle back to the Red Lake thing a little bit, but even just how doubts have formed a bit of this deconstruction reality that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody, I feel like I've doubted a lot in my life, and I think it can be really hard to have this doubt because a lot of times you have this doubt, it feels like a seed of something that goes, you've based your whole life on a lie. Like this, everything is wrong. And so even though it can be a little thought or a thought you can even push aside, these doubts can feel like just like incredibly like disparaging and cause you to go into despair. And so I think doubts themselves, I think they themselves cause people to begin to deconstruct, analyze their faith in a way that goes, okay, here, how can I deconstruct this thing? What's going on? Oh, am I right? And so, listen, I don't know. It's worth listening to the Rhett and Link podcast. They each did their own on how they deconstructed. And for Rhett in particular, it really seemed doubt was like a big part of his story. And and I remember thinking at one point as he was talking about doubts, I remember thinking, I don't know if that's how we're supposed to wrestle with doubt. So first I'll say this. I think in the church, we should always bring our doubts to the table.
Yes.
I think we can have doubts for long periods of time. We can wrestle with them for years even. But there was this moment.
If we couldn't, I mean, like, all the apostles are dead.
Yeah, all the apostles, like, all the Psalms.
They're disqualified.
The Psalms are heresy Psalms. So I think something he said in there. There's this moment where he was talking about the resurrection, and he's basically saying something along the lines of like, I would have these doubts about the resurrection, but then I would just be like, I just have to have faith, and I would just have faith, and so he'd almost like land on that doubt of the resurrection, and I began to wrestle with that as a believer, and I began to go like, can a believer with the resurrection in particular? What does that look like to doubt that, wrestle with that, deconstruct with that? And so, I kind of began to think, I don't know if where Rhett landed was a good place to land, where he just kind of goes, I just gotta have faith, about this, I don't know if that's a good place to land when you're having a doubt about the resurrection. So I'm honestly just kind of curious, how would you like want to pastor someone through that? Like, how would you have pastored Rhett through that if he had been honest with you and open with you about his doubts and how serious they were and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the first piece is already what you said, right? It's like, no, this is okay for you, you know. And hear me, like, there's hope. Maybe some of you watching or watch later, like, no doubts, right? Like, they're gonna happen. Yeah. They happen for me, right? And I don't mean that like you're like, even for
Apostle
me,
Vince.
That's Bishop.
Bishop
Vince. I know, like, but I mean, like, we live in this. You know what I mean? Like, we're paid to like read the scriptures all the time, and like, no, like, the doubts are there. They're real. So I think that's the first piece, right? Is hey man, no, you're fine. Like this is part of the story. I think drawing them to the Psalms, right? Drawing them into those moments of like lament. Especially, like we've talked about in length, right? Psalm 88 of just like, hey man, there's no bow at the end of Psalm 88. Like, he's just upset. He doesn't find God.
It's just emo. It's the emo song.
It's the Dashboard. It was written by Dashboard Confessional. If you guys didn't know that, they actually wrote Psalm 88. So if you don't know with them, maybe go listen. Probably not. But I think like drawing to that, like, hey, there's like, no, dude, you don't need to put a bow on it all. Like, we can really wrestle through all that stuff. I think setting that foundation for them, pointing them to the apostles, pointing to like, these guys abandoned Jesus. They weren't there at his crucifixion. You know what I mean? It literally took them the resurrection to return, right? And I think like in that, the answer is even like, notice the doubt of every apostle, right? Leading up to the death of Christ. And then all of a sudden, they all start jumping back in the fold. Years, I mean, literally days, but we know we have like documented like years after this of they're like, oh, well, no, I'm back in. Like, you don't just jump back in when your leader just died. You jump back in because you saw that dude come back to life, right? So I think there's just the reality then of trying to point very much so to like the reality of like the resurrection being the central piece of it. And here's some realities of how we can actually navigate this. Here's some great resources in the midst of it that I think it becomes then the central piece for why we believe the rest of the stuff. Right? I mean, like, because Jesus rose from the dead, then now I can believe this other stuff. You know what I mean? Like, if he didn't, then it's like, let's go home. You know what I mean? Like, let's take Sunday mornings off. Let's not do small groups, all that kind of stuff. But because he rose from the dead, there's a great book. It's coming out. It's I think it's going to be like 3,500 pages. So it's like the Brothers Karamazov times 2. Like, it is just a massively long book that's about to come out, and it's all on the resurrection. And so it's not out yet. The author of it has written a bunch of other stuff, but he just pretty much compiled every piece of evidence that says like this thing happened,
Wow.
and it's 3,500 pages long.
Wow,
so
that's pretty good.
you should probably all read it.
Yeah, so almost kind of what you're saying, like
Yeah.
if Rhett was in our life, you almost would have said, hey, like first of all, your doubts, it's okay. Like everybody has doubt. It's a natural human thing
Yeah.
to doubt for a variety of reasons. I think we'll get into some more of those as well. And then secondly, you'd probably even kind of go with the resurrection in particular, like,
Yes.
yeah, but if this is where you're landing, like you
Yes.
don't believe in the resurrection, that's probably a problem.
That's a problem.
Like,
Yes,
probably
right,
a
yeah.
problem. Like,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
yeah. But even though that's a problem, like explore that, see if it's true, see if it's real, see like. So I think that's you're a good pastor. I think that would be good. Yeah.
Thank you.
I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't give him a big head. But no, I think that's good. I think that makes a lot of sense. Well, let's leave kind of this worldview, the West.
That's
like,
number one. That's
that was
the first
number one.
point.
The other ones might go a little
They'll go a
faster.
little
They might
faster.
not. I don't know. I think we'd be remiss to talk about the church and how the church itself, the body of Christians, whether you think it's an institution or not, we think it's all the believers in the world make up a body, a family. But they're also institutions, and they're also local institutions, and they're also all kinds of institutions. And so we think probably the church itself has caused a lot of people to deconstruct their faith because the church has acted in just bad ways, in oppressive ways, abusive ways, negative ways towards people, and that causes someone to go, well then, is this stuff even real?
Right.
Like, so this kind of deconstruction, happens because of bad church experiences. Let's just talk about some of those things. Like, what are some of the bad church experiences
There's a lot, unfortunately.
people, unfortunately, that people have that kind of causes them to deconstruct their faith?
Yeah. I'll start by just saying, like that's part of your story. Like, man, I want you, like, we truly see you. I think there was a whole lot of eyes being opened, right? With I think the Me Too and the Church Too movement, right? Yeah. That then it kind of
it's horrible.
Those type of things were like, gosh, this is bad, right? You had Joshua Harris deconstructing his faith and repenting from some of the purity culture stuff, which had its benefits, but had certainly its pitfalls that have really hurt people. I mean, there's just, and then you just look at our history, like, so there's lots of stuff. But I mean, I think like the top one that floats, I think, to the surface for me is really like abuse. Abuse at its worst, right? And that we're talking sexual, physical, emotional, spiritual abuse. And that's the worst. But then also, I think you can just move towards like lack of love, right? Totally. Like it's just like so when you have a doubt, you're kind of shown to be a pariah in the church. You know what I mean? Like, how dare you? You know what I mean? Or you've got so many people that were in church leadership that were like trying to just be faithful and do gospel work, but they were overseen by a leader that was just harsh and manipulative and out to build their own kingdom. And you kind of get all these things, and you start harming people in the same ways. And there is a reality to the leadership positions in the church that, and I know you and I talk about this often, and with the rest of Redemption pastors and staff, of like, for whatever reason, like there comes authority with this office that we've been called into, and that should make us like stink and tremble, and in godly fear, be like, I don't want to wreck people, and yet there is this long trail of people that have been really hurt, right, by both intentional and unintentional actions of church leadership. And then also by lay people in the church, right? Where it's, you just begin to hear like story after story after story. I mean, dear friends of mine that are like, hey, like I was in, but gosh, man, I did this thing, and then all of a sudden I was out. Like, you know what I mean? Like love wasn't for me. A dear friend that had an abortion, and she was, that was her story. It got found out, dude, boom, she was done in that church, right? Like people just like, no, like you're clearly, you don't love Jesus. And it's just like, gosh, so you see these stories, and that's a big part of it. But it's not the only stuff, right? Like, and because even some of that abuse, it flows out of like other things, like just bad teaching, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, bad teaching I think is a huge example. Even before we get there, I almost want to sit in that abuse stuff more. Just like there's like I just can't imagine. Like, so I think sometimes some of us in the church, when someone's deconstructing their faith, are like, "How could you?" Whatever. But I just can't imagine.
Yeah.
You have this person that's either a leader in the church or all in on the faith, and they're just doing things Jesus flat out said, "Don't do this."
Yeah.
And of course, there's going to be a dissonance there. Like, of course, that's going to cause like deconstruction. Like, you're going to say, especially if you're a child and this abuse was happening,
Yes.
and Jesus said some intense things. And like, if you do anything, like if you cause my child to sin, it's better if I throw you in the ocean with stone around your neck. Like, you know, like
he was not messing around.
And so there's almost like I want us to cultivate like empathy for people that are deconstructing their faith, especially in regards to lack of love, or because of abuse, because that, like, man, I just can't imagine what that would be like, because luckily I've been protected for the most part from some of those kinds of situations. And so anyways, I just want, like our church, I want us to be able to go try to get to like what's going on, and the demonic perversion of someone that proclaims to be a Christian and might even be a Christian abusing somebody in the church. But so I agree. I think that's a huge one, why people begin to deconstruct their faith, and it makes sense.
And it's not just if it happened to them, right? But it happened to friends of theirs. Or honestly, there's just so many stories of it now where it's like, well, geez, like you guys are supposed to represent Jesus, and then this stuff's going on. Clearly, that can't be right. Like the logic of it doesn't. It's not that unsound.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, it makes sense. Yeah, no, that's good. So another part of the church, something the church contributes to, is just bad teaching, I think, and so just bad discipleship in general, kind of both these things hand in hand. And I think a lot of times people deconstruct their faith because I think a lot of churches are run by people with egos that are just trying to do their show, whatever, which is ironic to say on a Facebook Live thing.
That's called
on a show.
Live.
Yeah. So maybe we need to wrestle with this. Jesus Live. Well, then people think we think we're Jesus. Then it gets confusing. So, I think a lot of times people grow up in the church and their depiction of who God even is just, they'll talk to me and they'll be like, yeah, so God is this way or he's that way, right? Because my youth pastor, this guy in a small group said this. And I'll be like, man, there's verses in the Bible that flat out contradict that. That would say like, no, God is not like that. God is like this. He's this. And so I think a lot of times just bad discipleship, bad teaching causes people to walk away from the faith because they go, well, if those are the heralds of Christ, if those are the little Christians, as a lot of times, or the little Christ, as Christians are often called, like, then I don't want any part of that. That doesn't seem like who God is. I'm just going to walk away. And then often I'll get in conversations with those types and be like, well, look at who God says he is, though, for real. Like, let's look at what the Bible actually says. And I've had a lot of my atheist friends almost go like, what? I did not, like, there's... What begins to happen in the church because of this bad teaching, because of bad discipleship, is perception becomes reality. Like this guy taught me that Jesus is for sure like this type of a person, or does this or does that, and so they go, so I can't have any part of that faith. I can't. And sometimes there's good reason, like people are seeing the accurate picture of Jesus, but I think a lot of times bad teaching, bad views of God, small views of God make people walk away from the faith. So I think that's another big one in the church. What other kinds of things happen in the church that you think cause people to deconstruct?
Yeah, I mean, tagging on to that, right? Like, there's the reality of, like, sometimes people generally do have a good question.
Yeah.
Totally. that the Bible, like, doesn't answer clearly.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, totally.
And I think, like
sometimes their doubt is
pretty good.
You got us there. Like, yeah.
And I think there's a part of it. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, and I wrestle with that too.
And like almost go like, there should be a freedom Christian. Well, that's a good question.
That's a good question.
I'm not sure.
And to realize, I think in the midst of that, like, the Bible wasn't trying to answer every question that we could ever come up with. That's just not what the Bible's trying to do. The Bible's trying to reveal this grand meta narrative of God and His relationship with mankind. So I think this church, like, just look right at you. Like, there's a need for the church to be like just secure in Jesus and secure in our faith, where it's like we can literally say like, you know what, I don't know the answer to that, but Jesus rose from the dead. You know what I mean? Like there's a certain level of like, I love you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
And but then wrestle and press into that with people.
Yeah, something I think it was our professor has said it, Mike Goheen, and I think even Keller has said some of this stuff, but we've taken the Bible, and because of the Enlightenment, we've wanted to make it an Enlightenment document. So then when so it has to fit through the scientific method perfectly. And so then what people begin to do with the Bible is make it an Enlightenment book.
Yes.
Which is hard because the Bible is not an Enlightenment book. It wasn't written in the time of the Enlightenment.
Right.
It wasn't written with perceptions of the Enlightenment, and maybe in certain moments.
Well,
sure,
and you contrast that with like the United States of America was formed as like the first post-Enlightenment country. Yeah. Like they were like, like we are an Enlightenment country now. Yeah. And that's shaped everything. So you put that in contrast to this book that's not meant to do that.
And I think, so I think a lot of times when we're defending the Bible or answering questions from the Bible, instead of using the Bible, we'll use like this Enlightenment stuff to like try to be like, well, this is the answer that will make you feel good because this is what the Enlightenment says. And so I think it's just important for us as Christians to go, the Bible sometimes is not going to answer the question the way you want it answered.
Right.
It's not going to speak to your culture. It's not going to speak to the Enlightenment. Always, I think the Bible, again, I think it really is God's authoritative word. I want to be clear on that. And I think it speaks to all cultures in all times and all places, all peoples in all places. But sometimes the framework we have, and we want the Bible to speak to a specific framework, it's just not going to do that. It's just not going to maybe speak, and maybe it will, but not in a way that you like. Just like, man, I don't like these answers. Like, they don't make me feel refreshed because of culturally who I am. So,
right. The last piece of it is, I think when you look at how the church has maybe botched some of this, right, is we're supposed to create kind of like this alternative kingdom, this upside down kingdom that just looks countercultural, not because it's like trying to be countercultural, it just is. Yeah. But the people of God, going back to Israel, right? Look, going back to Adam and Eve, right? Adam wanted to be like the world. Like, the snake slithers up and was like, hey, like, dude, like, you could be like this. You know, God's like, no, that's not for you, right? But it's like, no, I want this instead. And I think the church and the people of God have constantly found themselves in this syncretistic reality of, no, I'm going to look like the world. Like, it's just easier to do that. The idols are great, right? Yeah. Like the wealth is there, whatever it may be. Yeah. And so honestly, like we get into the like political syncretism where now the church has now bought into and aligned itself with one or the other political party, or you know, you have to be neither. And there's all these definitives because this is what the church has married itself to. Yeah. And that is never the calling of the church. We've wed ourselves to different cultural ideals, you know, different things that like the culture's been like, hey, you should live this way. Like, yes, you know, let's do like the wealth and prosperity gospel. Yeah. We have these little bits and pieces where I think people see through that. And I think, what the heck? Like, why would you're not offering anything different? Yeah. All you're doing is you're offering the same values, but you're telling me I can't have sex, right? Like it's, you know what I mean? Like at the base, like you're telling you want me to buy into the same stuff, but I can't have any fun, which isn't true. But that's, I think, a lot of times like syncretism works. It's just we just look like the world, so we're not this alternative thing that's attractive, you know?
Yeah, I feel like I really relate to that because I feel like I've had a lot of friends. They were like, man, the 2016 election and the stats, especially from the white evangelical church, but even from both sides, or all sides of the church, I should say, caused me to like deconstruct my faith. Caused me to go, what are we doing here? Like, what's going on? Like, who are we? What are we about? And so, and we're not trying to get political or put anybody on blast, but the syncretism, the seeming marriage between the church and different political parties that just causes people.
It's political idolatry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or and even just like with the prosperity gospel, where people turn on TV and they're like, okay, the Christian channel has these guys that are
Right.
supposedly eradicating coronavirus, and then telling you to send them in tons of money, even if they've lost their job and all that. Like there's all this
Sow a seed.
sow a seed and you'll reap all this kind of stuff. And so I think that's a big reason people deconstruct, because they're just like, this is all fake. It's almost like they're like, no, I've got the scales off my eyes, it's you guys that don't. When we're kind of like, no, we do have we have our baggage, we have our scale, we have our like blind spots, we have things that are problem. And I also think the American church is incredibly sick, in my own estimation. Not always. I think I'm really blessed by our church and the churches in our city a lot of times, but just the last 40, 50 years, how much you see the American church is married to something that's so anti-Christ,
Right.
Is crazy to me.
Sure.
And so, and then that makes sense why people deconstruct in the midst of that. They go, well,
Yeah,
that's
it's
not who
just
he is.
another piece of the puzzle,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
And that's the thing, is this stuff becomes this overwhelming avalanche, and then you have
Yeah.
the people that you're listening to, the people around you that are all saying the same stuff, and it just becomes then like, it becomes, well, this is literally. So I think there was the last bucket that we wanted to address. We'll try and get to it quickly. I think we're at an hour now, but the last bucket was this idea of, hey, yes, the worldviews are difficult to navigate. Yes, there's all these problems that exist in the church, and we have to acknowledge those and the problems that they cause. But at the end of the day, there's this third bucket that is a reality of the world we live in, and it is the reality and the presence of Satan and sin.
Yeah.
Talk about that for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just even kind of this, I think we have to look at this idea of sin and Satan and powers and dominions kind of at a like 30,000 foot level of like, there's these two realities. There's one where sin of how we don't know how many like demons and whatever sort of spiritual beings they are, because even Jesus uses some different language to refer to them. But these evil spiritual beings that are out to thwart everything that God is about. God is about peace and shalom and harmony and love and all these things. And Satan is actively working against that.
Right.
And besides that, almost collectively, the universe is broken in a way almost that's wrestling with that and groaning with that, to use some biblical language there. So that would be kind of the first kind of like macro, big level of I think how Satan works.
Yeah, these real forces that are out there that, like, as Christians, like, we believe this, right? Like, we just believe that realm is happening, that there's a war waging, like the language of the scriptures, and we can't. I think we can just. I think too easy, right? Instead of like accepting culpability over where the church has blown this in some ways, we're just like, it's a Satan. You know what I mean? Like, I think we do that, but I think there's another camp that's like, it's not that at all, right? Like that the scriptures aren't true, and there's Satan prowls around like a lion looking for someone to devour. He's like everything he said, he's looking to destroy. But at the real micro level, we have to look at ourselves. Like, you know what I mean? Like there has to be this bit for all of us, wherever we're at, especially as we start looking at friends of ours that are deconstructing, and saying, like, if we want to move in empathy and care, we have to start being introspective about this idea of Satan and sin and the way it impacts me, right? Like, I am a sin-filled person, and we often say this in church, right, that all of us are 3 to 5 terrible decisions, right, away from calamity, like just completely ruining our lives.
All of us,
and that's just the truth for each of us. So sin it's not just the force, right, that is like just manipulating this world. It is very much also the active reality of how I choose to engage this world.
There's like a part of your heart that just wants to rebel against God and His goodness.
And that's not new, right? That's Genesis chapter 3. I mean, this has been a thing for humanity since the beginning. Like, we've wanted to do our own thing, and so I think like those realities of Satan and sin on the macro and micro levels, they are playing an active role in this deconstruction and people leaving the faith. Of people the big forces are coming, but then there's reality of like, no, I just want to sin, right? Like, and being a Christian is too hard to be able to do the things I want to do. Like, and that I have friends that's their story too. They're like, hey, like the Christianity thing, it wasn't even necessarily I didn't believe it. It's just this stuff was more fun, right? Like this stuff was more enticing, and I think bad teaching about Jesus and all that stuff plays into that too. But I think there's part of like the wooing of sinful, licentious living. You see it in everything that's out there, right? Like I mean, it's like every billboard. It's just I clamor for that, and marketing, right? That's like made and like perfectly structured to make you think your life stinks without it. You know what I mean? That type of stuff. So I think sin pulls us away too. And so that's a problem for all of us. But we want to wrap this up. So this just sounds depressing.
Yeah.
Like you mean like we spent an hour just saying like why deconstruction. There's some good things to it, but ultimately it's terrible and it's leading to these awful things. And here's why it's happening. And it's a whole lot of stuff. It's like, well, what the heck do we do now? What in the world is the answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I would love people to walk away with is, if you're deconstructing anytime if you would say I'm deconstructing my faith right now, or you know someone that is, if you are yourself, analyze your own deconstruction. Like begin to go, what are my biases? What's influencing me right now? Why am I doing this? And I think there's a loving way for us to do that with our friends that are deconstructing too, and go like, hey, but why are you real? Like, it sounds like this. Yeah, you have some good questions or good answers, but maybe you really want this, or maybe like to just even analyze how we deconstruct. Like Keller always says, doubt your doubts. So when you have doubts, that maybe you could even doubt those doubts in order to say something along the lines of, maybe that doubt exists even just because of the sort of things I desire and want and I'm influenced by. So I'd say that. I'd say another aspect is like, you know, Paul to Timothy said, beware of these itching ears. You know, like these people that will
hear certain.
They want to hear teachers that will tell them the things they want to hear. And I feel like, especially in the American church, this is kind of what deconstruction looks like for us. It doesn't always look like, oh, I'm just an atheist now, but it kind of looks like, you know what, I'm going to give up central truths about who God is, because there's other aspects of who God is that maybe are more important to me, or I think oversede or supersede or whatever. And sometimes there's some truth to that. I don't know, but so they'll find churches or people that will teach the things that tickle the itch in their ear, or itch the tickle in their, I don't know, scratch the itch in their ear. So
tickle the itch.
Tickle the itch. So anyways,
it's like next new Christmas toy coming out.
Yeah. So yeah, I would just say, like, just to be aware of that we have that. Like I have that all the time. I think anytime there's something in the Bible I don't like, I want to figure out how it's not really saying that. Like, I think that's just like so common for me.
Right.
I wanted to circle back to another question as we're closing.
Yeah.
I said I was going to ask you two in the middle, but then we got off track. But my second question is this: a lot of this just sounds kind of like, then don't engage with people that aren't Christians. Like, what does cultural engagement look like? This, like, if we, it seems like Christ was in the world, loving the world, caring for the world, with the messiest of sinners, the brokenness of people. What does that mean for us? Do we culturally engage? Are we being too crazy here? Yeah. Like, well, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, I think one of the best things, right, is we do culturally engage with an emphasis on we culturally engage.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's the brand of Christianity that we kind of operate in, you know, predominantly here in the West is a very individualistic brand of Christianity. And so if you're out there engaging, usually you're like the Lone Ranger. You know what I mean? Every time we see in the scriptures, it was like the movement of the church into the lives of people. You do see, right? Absolutely, Jesus goes and dines at these tables, and those are great stories. But then, like, he leaves Simon's house, and then he goes and retreats with his 12.
Yeah. They
pray together, and then he even gets away by himself to be with his Father for days, right? So in all the ministry, you constantly see Jesus be like, okay, that was hard work. You know what I mean? Let me go and be with my Father. Let me go and be with the people that are going to remind me of the true story of the world. And so it is, yes, cultural engagement. Yes, love. Like, yes, be in these places.
Be
in fact,
even around.
Yeah, and that's not even like just good wisdom. Like, that's mandate from like Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, you need
that's
to
incarnational living.
Yeah, like, I mean, if we think that's a silly idea, Jesus shouldn't have moved here. Right?
Yeah.
Like, he shouldn't have come down. Like, he
Yeah.
was like, well, you blew this.
Yeah.
Like, you should have stayed up there and just yelled at us from a distance.
Yeah.
He's like, man, I'm going to get in the mess. So I think just yes to the cultural engagement. Again, it's mandate, but remember, like, we do it with like each other in community, and we do it with this constant understanding of like, no, we're meant to then still be built up by the church. Like, we need the Word of God. We need prayer. We need the disciplines. We need each other. And so the Lone Ranger Christianity, I think, has bred a lot of this. Like, you either have to engage or you have to like just holy huddle. And it's like, no, like you do both. Like you have to be filled up and then sent out. You get like Paul, right? Like Paul gets saved Damascus Road, right? Like, and then he's in Antioch. So if you don't know, this guy Saul gets saved miraculously. He ends up writing most of the New Testament. Paul, before he goes out on his first missionary journey, is like discipled in Antioch, at a church in Antioch, for what was like 10 years, or I mean like 7 years, I think it was, or whatever. Just a long stinking time, because he had to be kind of right. Like, this is what's true, right? And then in that, he's always sent out. He's always with other people, doing it in community. So I mean, that's a bit of a longer answer, but I think that's a massive piece of it, because at the end of the day, we echo the words of Peter to Jesus, that you alone have the words of life. You know, so. If that is true, if we're resolved, like Jesus alone, you have the words of life, dude, like all day, you need to be out there. Totally. You know, so. That's good.
Something else I kind of wanted to ask you is, I've heard you use this term before recently, reconstruction, and in regards to this deconstruction conversation. And so, what is that? What do you mean when you're saying reconstruction? What does that look like? And
I'd say some of the best stories, I think, and you have some too. Like, some of the best stories that like have come across my life in the last couple of years have been stories of reconstruction, where dear friends truly entered into a process of deconstruction, like real critical analysis of their faith, of why they believed what they believed, you know, and really nuanced, like real specific questions, and got to a place where like they were kind of just left with Jesus, which is not a terrible place to be.
That's a good place to be,
But I also don't know if it's healthy to just stay there. But that then in the midst of it, you reconstruct, right? And you rebuild back up and reestablish, because Jesus is the foundation. He is the solid rock with which we will stand. So let's rebuild those like firm, but on like a steady foundation where it wasn't just, hey, we adopted in a worldview of our parents, or we kind of just believed this for a while and we're not really sure why, and we never really took time to really address the doubts, whatever the things we talked about. But say like, no, we did all that, but Jesus still rose from the dead. Like, God still created the world. Like, there's so many things that cannot be answered outside of that. And so, man, like, take that next step of just saying like, like if you're in that phase of deconstruction, great. Navigate that with other people, okay? With other people that love Jesus specifically, and then help rebuild that faith. And honestly, the stories of that, they're awesome. Like, they're the stories of like, these people are some of the most loving, God-fearing, God-honoring, getting out there and loving the community people I know.
The Reconstructionists almost help us to see aspects of the faith we love, what we've missed, you know? Like, I just think of a lot of people I know that have deconstructed their faith because of church's stances on sexuality and even homosexuality in general, and just like seeing people deconstruct and reconstruct in the midst of that almost help us to love those of different sexualities better. And so
it's just this massive like sanctifying piece in the midst of all of it. Of just like, I think the deconstruction stuff should move the church to be more holy. Right? And to learn and to grow in the midst of it. So this was longer than I think we intended. Hopefully most of you were able to kind of track for most of it. I think most of you did. And if you're watching this towards the end here, we're gonna I think share some resources here in a bit that we'll post on the post for you guys to continue to follow up. We'd love questions or thoughts or comments that you might have that we can continue to address. But honestly, it's been helpful, I know, for us to address this stuff because it's just the water we're swimming in with some of you that are watching and people in our churches and people in our city that we all love dearly. And so thanks for being with us in the midst of it. We'll be back Sunday with our live stream for Sunday service to worship and open up the Word together. Anthony and I will both be kind of co-taking on this Sunday's text, which will be a lot of fun. And then back next Tuesday and Thursday with more Vinny G Live type stuff. So the last thing I wanted to highlight, if you did make it to the end of this video, is a lot of you have been asking what's going on for Easter. We'll have a ton of details coming this weekend, but we're going to put a ton of stuff out on social media. But what we're doing is in partnership with a bunch of churches around the country is this Jesus Changed My Life campaign. And so we're going to ask you guys at your homes or whatever to take 1 minute and film yourself sharing your story of how Jesus has impacted your life, changed your life. And we're going to ask you to post it on whatever social medias you have with some type of hashtag and line that invites people to the Easter service. And so we're going to share another video about that in a moment, but I just wanted you guys to know about that on the front end. So any closing thoughts or anything you'd like to leave?
Yeah, we love you guys. Just to reiterate why we do this, we wanted to have like interesting conversations and we're not that interesting, so maybe this was an interesting conversation. But we wanted on Thursdays especially just look at theological things and cultural things that are important to us and kind of happening in our midst and being talked about, and so that's a big reason why we're doing this. Yeah. I know Vince said some of that on the front end, but we're going to try to put this on the website somewhere in like a sermon audio podcast form. You could get the Tuesday update, weekly update thing we do as well there. So we just want to look for ways to be connected to you guys in this time. Find some good resources if you're deconstructing. I think the Bible Project, all their stuff, if you're deconstructing, is maybe the single best resource that I've seen used for people deconstructing their faith, which seems crazy, but yeah. I think their podcasts and their videos are super helpful. So, super helpful. We love you, church. We're thankful for you guys. Let us know if you have any questions or any ways we can serve you guys.
Especially if you are in that, if you're like, no, like I'm fully deconstructed, I'm like the faith is going by the wayside right now. No. Dude, like, we're not going to break COVID-19 precautionary measures, but we will find a way to sit down with you and get you some food, and we'll sit 6 feet away and just talk about life and Jesus, because he's awesome. So, church, we love you. We're praying for you. Thanks for being with us today, and have a great rest of your Thursday afternoon. See ya. I'm going to come around now and turn it off so we don't have good tech. So, Anthony, do a good pose. Let's see. I don't know where the button is. Oh, finish.